Good evening. Prime Minister Narendra Modi arrived in Moscow this evening, marking the first time that he is visiting Russia since it launched its campaign in Ukraine. Russia's first Deputy Prime Minister, Denis Manturov, received him at the airport. I look forward to further deepening the special and privileged strategic relationship between our nations, is what the Prime Minister said after landing in the Russian capital. He will be holding talks with Russia's President Vladimir Putin tomorrow. Prime Minister Modi has been treading a fine line between maintaining a long-standing relationship with Moscow and courting closer Western security ties. The visit is also Prime Minister Modi's first since he returned to power for a third term. I look forward to reviewing all aspects of bilateral cooperation with my friend President Vladimir Putin and sharing perspectives on various regional and global issues, is what the Prime Minister said in a statement before leaving New Delhi. We seek to play a supportive role for a peaceful and stable region. Russia is a key supplier of cut-price oil and weapons to India. Western powers have in recent years also cultivated ties with India as a bulwark against China and its growing influence in the Asia-Pacific region, while pressurizing it to distance itself from Russia. Prime Minister Modi last visited Russia in 2019 and hosted Mr. Putin in Delhi 2 years later, weeks before Russia began its offensive against Ukraine. India and Russia have maintained a very close relationship throughout the Cold War, and Russia was for a long time India's largest arms supplier. In many ways it still is. But Ukraine has stretched Russia's arms supply thin. Russia's share of Indian imports of arms has shrunk considerably in recent years. At the same time, India has become a major buyer of Russian oil, providing a much-needed export market for Moscow after it was cut off from traditional buyers in Europe. That's dramatically reshaped energy ties, with India saving itself billions of dollars while bolstering Moscow's war coffers. India's month-on-month imports of Russian crude increased by 8% in May to the highest level since July 2023, according to the commodity tracking data compiled by the Center for Research on Energy and Clean Air. From Russia, Prime Minister Modi will be travelling to Vienna, Austria, for the first visit to the Austrian capital by an Indian leader since the former Prime Minister Indira Gandhi in 1983. Well, joining us now, Charlotte Dubansky, an RT correspondent. I'm also joined by the former Ambassador of India, Meera Shankar, and Dr. Swasti Rao, Associate Professor at the Manohar Parrikar Institute of Defence Studies. Charlotte, let me come to you first. What's on the agenda for the talks between President Putin and Prime Minister Modi?
Well, as you've outlined there, this is an incredibly important meeting between the two leaders. This is the first bilateral summit that Modi has held, a foreign summit, since he was elected back in June of last month. Now, they're going to be talking multifaceted relations. They're going to be strengthening their alliance, looking at accelerating the economic ties and the issues between the two countries. Lots to be discussed here, because these are two key trading organizations. And we know that this is important. I mean, the trade is 65 billion between the two countries, but there is a massive trade imbalance there. And I'm sure that's something that Narendra Modi is going to be looking at speaking to President Putin about while he's here during this two-day summit.
Charlotte, India continues to import Russian oil. It's being done in India's national interest. Could we expect some statements or announcements on that, or perhaps even announcements to step up the oil import from Russia?
Well, the oil import at the moment stands at an all-time high. It reached that high just a couple of months ago, back in April. And when we look at the figures now, we know that 40% of India's oil is coming from Russian sources. We know that Rosneft, which is the Russian oil producer, has just signed a new deal with India. And we know that there is more desire to have more trade with India on this. India talking recently to its counterparts in the US and saying that that oil from Russia coming in at a lower price actually was what kept it affordable for Indian citizens over the past 2 years. So incredibly important. But there's something that they need to address before perhaps we can see even more trade between the two countries, and perhaps, of course, address that imbalance in trade. Because while there is a $65 billion trade between the two countries, of that, around $4 billion is Indian exports. And this is the mechanism from the rupee to the ruble. As you are probably very aware, the rupee is not easily convertible. It's not held by a lot of other other countries. And what we've heard now is the Reserve Bank of India saying that they're going to ease some of the restrictions, which will ease the issues with foreign companies perhaps getting their capital investment out of the country. And there is, we understand, something in the pipeline that Rosneft want to announce even further. Maybe that will come on this visit. We will have to wait and see.
And a final question, Charlotte, is there any expectation of the situation in Ukraine coming up in talks? India has a close relationship with both Russia and Ukraine. Is there a sense that Prime Minister Modi could be bringing a message of peace or encourage Russia and later on perhaps Ukraine to end the war?
Well, Narendra Modi has been very clear since the start of the Ukraine conflict that India wants peace. It's sat on the fence, not condemning Russia, not condemning Ukraine. And I think it's pretty clear. Every statement we've heard is that India says it wants peace. It wants to look at a humanitarian issue. India has been party to some of the talks that Ukraine has held, but India continues to say that peace talks are needed to find a solution to that issue in Ukraine. What's been quite clear, though, is that India has been under huge pressure from countries in the West, particularly the US, to condemn Russia's involvement in that conflict. And India has been pretty clear it's not going to. We know the relationship between India and Russia is a very special one, and it's a very important one for both countries. And I think Narendra Modi has navigated this incredibly well. So I think he'll come here to Russia. There'll be lots on the agenda to talk between him and President Putin. And of course, I'm sure the issue of Ukraine will come up, and I'm sure Narendra Modi will continue down that same line that India would like a peaceful resolution to the conflict.
All right, thanks, Charlotte, very much for being with us. I'm going to go across to Ambassador Meera Shankar. Ma'am, from a larger diplomatic geostrategic standpoint, how is maintaining and strengthening the relationship with Russia essential for New Delhi?
Well, I think it's an important juncture for the visit because it is Prime Minister Modi's first visit to Russia since the Ukraine war began, and his first visit since 2019, though President Putin had paid a visit to Delhi in 2021. But, the situation in Ukraine continues to be fraught. And even as Prime Minister Modi and President Putin will be meeting, President Biden is hosting a NATO summit, a summit of, countries who are part of the Western sanctions coalition on Russia, and Zelensky to decide on Ukraine policy, further Ukraine policy. So it's a fairly delicate juncture for the visit. Secondly, I think that Russia has emerged as a very major energy supplier for India. In the last 2 years, our imports from Russia have gone up 20 times. Earlier, Russia's energy basket was always oriented towards Europe. And then in later years, in recent years, also China. But there wasn't much export of energy to India. As Europe has islanded itself from Russian energy supplies or has cut off energy supplies, India has emerged as a buyer of Russian oil. So for India, I think we would like to discuss with Russia more predictable discounts on their oil because it's been up and down. Also, more stable payment arrangements. I think Foreign Minister Lavrov said perhaps the two countries might move to having 60% of their trade in national currencies. We have to wait and see what the outcome is. And of course, we might discuss longer-term contracts with Russia for supply of both oil and gas. On the defense side, where Russia has been a key strategic partner of India over the years, I don't think that we are going to discuss any new deals as such for equipment because there's already pressure and delays on meeting the obligations under deals which have already been done because Russia's supply lines are overstretched as a result of their own requirements.
Yes.
But we would discuss stepping up the delivery of the S-400 missiles and other equipment, the frigates, naval frigates, which are already in the pipeline, and deliveries are expected either by the end of this year or next year. And
Dr.
finally,
Rao,
I think, if I may.
Yes, ma'am, go ahead.
There is the issue of trade imbalance. And here, because Russia has accumulated large rupee reserves, since the balance is overwhelmingly in their favor, we will discuss how to deal with it.
Right.
Maybe increase Indian exports to Russia, but also the possibility of Russian rupee investments in Indian infrastructure. In fact, one news report I saw some time back said Russia could invest up to $50 billion rupees in Indian infrastructure projects. $50 billion worth of rupees in Indian infrastructure.
Right. Okay, ma'am, I just wanted to quickly go across to Dr. Swasti Rao, who's with us as well. Dr. Rao, India has obviously a very important historic relationship with Russia. And in as much as that works for us, for example, when it comes to energy, when it comes to defense, it's also problematic because Russia is very close to China. In fact, many of the weapon systems that they sell us, they sell Russia as well. The S-400 is sold to Russia, it's sold to us. Kilo-class submarines in the past, sold to India, sold to China. Variants of the Sukhoi 30 fighter, sold to China, sold to India. Therefore, it is problematic at one level, isn't it?
Absolutely. Good evening to you, Vishnu, and good evening to the rest of the panelists. Thank you for having me. Yes, that is, I've been saying that this particular visit by Prime Minister Modi is long overdue and long awaited because there are certain issues that we actually need to be, that need ironing out between the two sides. We have so far been discussing energy, of course, all the other issues related with why the rupee ruble mechanism is not working, etc. But to your question particularly, yes, India also needs to be mindful, and I think this is the larger context in which this current visit should be looked at, is that there has been a deepening of China-Russia strategic alignment. And this again, both sides are trying. I mean, from India's perspective, we all know that we have been trying our best to not let Russia fall completely into the lap of China for our own national interest reasons. And similarly, from Russia's perspective also, it should make sense to keep the engagement with India not just going, but also thriving. And you see a lot of political will, on both sides. However, the structural challenges are such that you would expect that longer that the war in Ukraine stretches, longer, deeper the alignment might get. And to your red lines, of course, I think India has to have a very realistic view of how Russia also pursues its, I would say, independent approach when it comes to China. In fact, now that you mention it, in the last 5 years, and if you go by the CIPRI data that was released recently, India has not really placed a fresh order like Ambassador Shankar was just mentioning, with Russia. And if you look at the export base that Russia has had in the last 5 years, Vishnu, at the beginning of 2019, if Russia was supplying weapons to about 31 countries. That has fallen down to 9 countries now. And China is definitely one of them. In fact, if you look at the TIV values, which is trend indicator values of the weapons which are being exported, you will see that Russia actually exports a lot of weapons to China. Not just that, also if you look carefully at the China nuclear program, you will see that a lot of that is actually coming from Russian support. So these are things that require us to be realistic. I think the Indian leadership is extremely, I would say, etched in realism when it comes to that. However, taking issues which are bilateral, taking issues which require ironing out is also required, because like I said, that Russia is not only a historic friend, but also the relevance of Russia is going to remain in whatever geopolitical churning we find ourselves in. So it makes perfect sense for India to actually meet at the topmost level. And in fact, I should mention this, that if you look at how in the last few years the strategic communication or the channels have been working, I would say that actually it's got quite the political interactions have gone. There've been a transformation in it. For example, we all know that Modi is meeting Putin in person after a long time. Last time when this particular summit happened, it was before the war, right? But what the other thing that I would like to focus here is that even when we met in December 2021, for example, we had signed a 10-year defense cooperation program.
Yes.
And if you look at the progress that has been made, there's not much progress made. While the war started in 2022, and probably it is going to go on for the next I don't know how many years, maybe another 2-3 years. So I think that is something which needs to be ironed out, because as the remaining 2 deliveries of the S-400s are still awaited, and according to the latest estimates that we have from Russia, those are likely to come to India by the 3rd quarter of 2026. So I think there should be any uncertainty around that should be ironed out. And the other thing that I wish to mention here is that, if you remember, India has this mechanism called 2+2 with its close partners. So with all the Quad partners, we have a 2+2. With the UK, we recently started a 2+2. Similarly, with Russia, we have a 2+2 as well. But the only 2+2 dialogue that we have had with Russia, again, goes back to December 2021, and we have not really had it after that. So I think this 2+2 mechanism, where both the foreign ministers and both defense ministers come and engage at the same platform, is something which will be very, very beneficial for where our ties are right now. Yeah, and lastly, I think the last point that I would like to make is also this geopolitical shift that we are probably seeing. There is some news of Pakistan. The Pakistani envoy to Russia actually mentioned that they are invited by Russia to join the INSTC. Now, from India's perspective, the Chennai Vladivostok, that corridor, as well as the INSTC, are important alternative connectivity routes. And I think these scenarios also need to be discussed at the highest level in terms of what scenarios are emerging.
Okay, Dr. Rao, just half a second. I wanted to go back to Ambassador Shankar. Ma'am, does India have the political capital to potentially make a difference when it comes to the biggest question of them all presently in the world, Russia and Ukraine?
Well, I think India has made it clear that it sees the conflict coming to a halt only through dialogue and diplomacy, and that, military superiority is perhaps not going to end the conflict. It might just linger on. So talks become very necessary. And that's the message that Prime Minister Modi gave to President Zelensky as well when he went for the G7 meeting. But I am not sure that, India would be heard. So I think what we have been doing is to convey our general sense that A, the conflict should end, B, the world wants peace, and C, that the peace comes through dialogue and diplomacy, and that India wants to be a positive force in the process of bringing peace and stability. But I'm not sure that we go with any specific proposals, or we have sought an active role in mediation diplomacy. So that's, I think, where the picture is still today. And eventually, I do think that, the countries have to talk about their concerns, as well as the previous correspondent mentioned, because, while Russia assures us that its relationship with China and with India are in separate baskets and they don't impinge on each other, I think it depends on how much China's influence in Russia grows as the West squeezes it further. And I think these are things which India would be concerned about. I'm sure the Russians want to understand the nature of India's relationship with the US and the Western world. And yet at the same time, this is a relationship which has endured. And in fact, perhaps a relationship which Russia values more since the war in Ukraine.
No, absolutely, ma'am. And I'm just interrupting because I just wanted to go across to my colleague Vasudha Venugopal, who's been reporting from Moscow. I'd like to thank you both very much for being with us. This is Vasudha's report. Take a look.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi's very critical visit to Russia to have bilateral meetings with Russian President Vladimir Putin begins on Monday. Joining me to talk about what's on agenda is legislator from Vladimir Putin's party, Abhay Kumar Singh, who's also Bihar born, in fact India born. Thank you so much for speaking to NDTV, sir. You come from a place in West Russia which has a huge history, and you've been in Russia for many years. You started out very simply as a medical student, and clearly a very inspiring life that you've led. But now, as the legislator of Putin's party, what do you think is on agenda when it comes to Narendra Modi, Putin's meetings?
You know very good my biography, so no need to say about that. And about visit of Narendra Modi today in Moscow, not only Vladimir Putin is waiting for that, every citizen of Russia is waiting for that meeting. People are very excited, and I think agenda, very important agenda will be touched in this meeting. The war supplies, war manufacturing, culture, economic, ruble trade, everything will be touched. I think, and the most important thing, I think it will come out, that is world geopolitics. This visit can change a bit. It will not change fully. It will change a bit world geopolitics. You know, in England, Sunak went away. Soon, I think after a few days, Macron will also fly. In November, we will wait for the US election. So everything is changing. Let's see what will come out.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi is on a very critical visit to Moscow in Russia to meet President Vladimir Putin. This is his first bilateral meeting since he assumed charge as the Prime Minister of India for the third time. But while politics goes on, there are also people-to-people ties here. In fact, I'm joined by two students from India who are studying medicine here, Rushdi and Gayatri. Thank you so much for speaking to NDTV. Tell us, how many years have you been in Russia, and what do you like about the city, and what do you study here?
It's been 3 years since I am here, and I am from Penza, and I studied medicine there. And the best thing about Russia is we feel secure, and most of us, our parents, are worried due to some war and other reasons. But we, being Indians here, feel safe as every point there's security. Even in the smallest city like Penza, we are secured. Here also we are secured, and so.
Gayatri, did you know that the Prime Minister was coming? In fact, you guys knew about it, right? So have you been following what's happening in India?
Yes, when we came here and we talked to our parents, and she also talked to her father on phone, then उन सब ने ऐसा बोलने लगा कि अरे यार तुम लोगों को पता है हमने मतलब वीडियो भेजा, देखो हमारे मोदी साहब वहीं पे है. तो पेरेंट्स सब बोलने लगे कि बोलना कि मोदी सर हम यहीं पे है, we heard to appreciate you and we all are very happy that you came here.
रशिया इंडिया के बीच में बहुत सारे टाइज बहुत पहले से थे, लेकिन अभी ये वॉर चल रहा है यूक्रेन में. आप ही की तरह बहुत सारे मेडिकल स्टूडेंट्स को वापस आना पड़ा. बट हाउ इज योर हैज देयर बीन एनी इम्पैक्ट एट ऑल ऑन योर लाइव्स, ऑन योर एजुकेशन?
Economically, there have been some impacts as our foreign exchange cards have not been working since long. So there are challenges about that. But keeping those things aside, we have no as such challenges. We are safe and we are secured, and there's everywhere security. So our routine university life is continued. So
has the cost of living gone up here?
Cost of living in Russia, see, Russia is not as a very stable economy as India is. So we have challenges throughout the year, and not only during war, but yes, there have been some ups and downs, and yes, financially the costs are difficult.
All right, so tomorrow is going to be a very, very important day with the Prime Minister set to meet Russia's Vladimir Putin. We'll be bringing you all the very latest details. One of the most important relationships of India, the 22nd India-Russia bilateral summit, the Prime Minister now in Moscow.